let's jump into this first story. And we're going to start off light. We're not going to just ease our way in with jokes about Trump and speeches and stuff. No, we're gonna be very calm. And Pentagon document warns the world is moving closer to a nuclear war because Russia and China are developing new nuclear missiles, bombers, and submarines. Are you familiar with the fourth turning, Darren?
Yes. No, I'm good friends with Steve, a previous guest, and that's a topic of his as well.
Right.
So, yes.
So there are fears that the crisis scenario, so for those not familiar with the fourth turning, there's like 4 seasons. The one we're in now is supposed to be the crisis. And it may be a domestic crisis, maybe international. But we've got the Pentagon, a report coming out right now saying there's increased potential for regional nuclear conflict with the country's main enemies, Russia, China, North Korea, and Iran. There's another big story that broke just in this past week. That satellite research shows China building 119 nuclear missile silos. Now, this could be a strategy for what they call, it's like a whack-a-mole strategy, where the U.S. did this in the 70s. They built a bunch of missile sites and then crossed their fingers, hoping that Russia would target the wrong ones. That may be what China's doing. But we also heard from China that Chinese state media said that if we want to investigate COVID, they want to just build more and more nukes and shivers down our spines. So I don't want to be overly pessimistic, but I don't know how do you guys feel about
building the potential for something doesn't mean that you're heading towards that thing. So I don't like the way they phrase the title that we're headed towards. Just sounds like arsenal building.
Yeah, I mean, of course, there's certainly a threat there, but I interpret these sorts of things as the Pentagon basically asking for a bigger budget.
Yeah, I was thinking
and you have to interpret in the context of all this weird UFO stuff, which I think also fits into that category. And basically, I think the Pentagon and the broader national security apparatus, with the end of the war on terror effectively, with the withdrawal from Afghanistan, they need to rely on 2 major grifts. And one of those grifts, I think, is a Cold War 2.0 with China, and this fits into that category. And the second grift, unfortunately, is the domestic war on us.
Yeah,
that's their next grift. And those are the 2 chief imprimaturs of the national security apparatus right now, is this Cold War 2.0 with China and this domestic war on terror, which by that effectively they mean the war on 70 plus million people who are Trump supporters or Trump adjacent or just generally fed up with our corrupt, dysfunctional, and possibly illegitimate ruling class.
That's a really good point, actually. So if you think about what's going on in every world of the culture war, or like every faction, you've got people who are on the right concerned about China, very much so. And so, of course, they ham it up like, oh man, war's coming. And I've talked about it quite a bit.
Right.
Then what happens is you'll end up with Republicans being like, we need to make sure we have shored up our defenses, bigger budgets for the war machine to defend us.
Yeah.
Now, does the left care about going to war with China? No.
Well,
For the most part. So what do they care about? The white supremacist terror threat. You need to give us more money to increase our budgets because of these evil Trump groups. There's my favorite one, is the hat trick, the UFOs. Now, what happens if they can't get the culture war left or right? The crackpots are scared of aliens. Tell everybody the aliens are out there. Give us more money.
Right. No, I mean, that's absolutely true. I do think depends on what level of how intricate we want to be. I think ultimately there is a connection between the kind of the quote unquote woke ideology that animates the domestic war on terror and our broader geopolitical aims and strategies. I think there's actually an underlying congruence there that really needs to be explored, rather than just, here's a bunch of woke stuff or culture war stuff that serves as a distraction, or we just kind of tack it on to everything else. There is an element to that, but I think what's lost in that discussion is really the degree to which there is method to the madness, and that the woke ideology itself is deeply integrated not only to our power structure domestically, but how we project power and affect our geopolitical aims overseas.
Well, how does that work?
Well, the short version for that is, so at Revolver.news, my news site, one of our first really big stories was exploring this concept called the color revolution, and noting that there was a color revolution basically being affected domestically in the lead up to the election. And this generated extreme controversy, and everyone was apoplectic. I think part of the reason for that is that up until that point, there was all this talk about this kind of vague, amorphous deep state, whereas the color revolution implicated a very specific faction of the deep state. And that specificity, I think, worried people. And just in a nutshell, a color revolution is basically you're not going in like Iraq, sending troops. You're not blowing stuff up. You're basically using mobilized mobs that are mobilized by non-governmental organizations that you have in a target country, and they're ginned up by the media and various other organizations, and they're mobilized on the basis of social causes. So in Eastern Europe, you see mobilization of women students to like go in the street and protest against whatever target authoritarian you have. And in other places, in China, for instance, you see the kind of color revolution technique being employed in terms of exacerbating or weaponizing existing ethnic cleavages. So you have a lot of focus on the Uyghurs, for instance. In Myanmar, you have the focus on the Rohingyas and so forth. And so this use of ethnic cleavages and this mobilized protest force that you see domestically, that's very much a part of this color revolution method of achieving our geopolitical aims abroad. And I think generally it's become a part of how the United States exercises its power, and overwhelmingly its power is still its soft power, notwithstanding all those talks about nukes and so forth.
So you're saying it's happening here in the U.S. We've definitely talked about
Yeah.
that, and we've gone over a lot of the beats on like what it is here in the U.S. But if it is happening here, who's doing it?
Well, I mean, I don't think we can attribute it to any one person. I think it's an institutional phenomenon, and it exists across every single institution in the United States. And the latest really big story that I've tried to cover at Revolver.news is, and it's difficult for people on the right to really grasp, is that the national security apparatus, traditionally thought of as, okay, here's the last bastion of people who I think their political psychology inclines them to want to venerate just and well-functioning institutions of authority, whereas I think people on the left like to critique unjust institutions of authority. So it's very difficult to get people on the right who want to venerate just institutions of authority to say, look, the entire national security apparatus, including the military itself at its highest levels, has become corrupted and infected and really weaponized against you. And that's very difficult. It's a difficult process psychologically for people on the right to understand, but it's happened across the board institutionally.
That's why I've been saying abolish the police. I mean, for a long time I was like, this is ridiculous. You know, these cops are out here trying to stop these riots. Well, then the DAs did nothing. Let most of the rioters go. We can clearly see that even if the cop themselves, and them are good people, they're funneling everyone into the same direction, where the DAs then say, far left go free, conservative to prison with you, far left go free. And so my view now is, if you sit back while this machine is working, it's the house always wins. If it's a 51% victory for the casino and a 49% chance for you, sure, you might win once or twice, but if you play you play long enough, the house always wins. If that pressure is applied right now through these progressive DAs in these big cities, then over time, the ultra woke individuals, the rioters, the Antifa, the BLM, they're going to keep getting released and keep being emboldened, and anybody who opposes them is going to keep getting locked up or charged, like we're seeing with January 6th.
No, absolutely. There's definitely a lot of truth to that, and part of the reason for this is that the left, or whatever you want to call it, really the ruling class has been far more effective in leveraging the infrastructure of power up to the DAs. This was something that George Soros identified a long time ago, that we want to basically buy up all the DAs, and he understood the implications of that. So really, there's a lot to unpack in there in terms of just understanding the infrastructure of power, which I think is a tremendous weak point on the right. And you see that in the just profound asymmetry of power, where like every single institution, including the military, is basically controlled by controlled by the left or this new version of the left that we've seen, and basically the right has zero institutional power.
Yeah. What do you do with an ultra woke military? They're telling everybody to do these trainings. They're weeding out quote unquote extremism. We've talked to a lot of people on the show who, or I should say, there are many friends of the show, not necessarily on the show, who've said they gave up their careers in military once they saw where things were going.
Right. Well, it's a real question, because you have broad swaths of the country who are inclined toward patriotism and defending the country, and the people who are most patriotic toward this country are the people most hated by the dominant institutions of the country. So how long is that type of dissonance sustainable? I think it's a lot more sustainable than we would think, just because people are good at deluding themselves. But it's not ultimately sustainable.
Thanks for checking out this clip from the Timcast IRL podcast. If you want to see the full show, come back to this channel, youtube.com/TimcastIRL, Monday through Friday at 8 p.m., where you can leave comments and super chat, and we actually will read your comments on the show. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and if you want exclusive members-only content, segments you can't get anywhere else, go to timcast.com, become a member, and we even have full bonus episodes. Thanks for hanging out, and we'll see you all next time.